Anyway, let's start now.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to give a little review, and then we're going to ask Phil, as he did last week, to start us off with the Nameless, the first poem from the Tai Chi. And anyway, the review, we've met. This will be the fourth time I believe we've met, or third time we've met. The point of the whole class started with the first meeting, in which we looked at the section in the Torah where Miriam and Aaron and Moses were together, and Miriam and Aaron were thinking that they may have reached the same level of ascendancy towards the divine as Moses, and it turns out that wasn't the case. God spoke to them and told them that they hadn't really gotten yet to the Tamuna. The Tamuna is what is the human available understanding or contact with the divine. So that was the first thing, and we discussed. Murray led the discussion to discuss the Tamuna from the perspective of Maimonides, who makes a distinction between the Tamuna and the Tselem and various other Hebrew words, pointing out that the Tamuna, as Leo Strauss translates as figure, not image, figure, is the only attribute of the divine that he will admit, at least at that point in the book. He, in the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides spends a lot of time dismissing all of the attributes of God. So he probably will eventually dismiss that one too. But it's the attribute of God that allows us to get a connection with the divine. So that's why I'm pursuing it, because, everybody wants a connection with the divine. I mean, I got a connection with my wife, I got a connection with my friend. If I have a connection with the divine, then I'm really going to be in good shape. Okay, then we went into the de Saltzman work, which pointed out that in order to do this kind of work, in order to search for the Tamuna, you have to be a little bit outside yourself. You have to have some kind of a transcendent aspect to yourself to be able to do this. The next piece was Phil's last week piece, which spoke about the fact that we also need a certain poetic sentiment. We need a little bit of poesis, what the Greeks called poesis, in our soul to be able to ascend to the divine. And today we're going to do Lao Tzu's first poem. And Phil, you want to start?
Thank you, David. I have to begin by saying I am totally unqualified to discuss this poem. I'm going to mention a couple of reasons.
That's why you were picked. What are you complaining about?
I'm completely defenseless, but there are reasons that apply maybe to all of us here. I've tried to get the Chinese original, not that I could read it, but because I have a relative who is a native speaker of Mandarin and may have been able to make some sense of it to me. But it's very old poetry, and it's said to be the text that we actually have is said to be corrupt, so we're not even sure what the text is, and also highly ambiguous. So this is where we start. So I don't think we should rely on any particular detail of the text, since our text that we have, including various translations I've looked at, and including one that's supposed to be a literal translation that I was unable to bring up and copy for you, they're all rather, some of them are rather different, and one of the scholarly discussions says, I think it's worth mentioning this, that the translators diverge wildly by focusing on the letter of the text in pursuit of its spirit, which it turns out corresponds closely, usually to the translator's own opinions and the translator's own ideas. So we should be aware of the fact that we have our own opinions and our own ideas. And even if we could read the text, the archaic text from, I guess, maybe the early 6th century.
And whose
BC.
version do you have? Whose version? Who are you quoting from in
Well,
terms of what you're
there's
going
one
to
on the
read to us?
there's
Which
one that-
one do you have?
Oh, well, for simplicity's sake, I guess we'll try to stick to the one that was put out for the class, and I am completely unable to. I mean, it was there as a PDF, and David sent it out, and I don't know if you have it, but
No,
David,
I didn't have time.
I can't help. I can't help with that. It's a very good question. But
Well, go ahead in any case, Phil.
okay, so but he did send it out.
I have it.
It was linked in the congregation.
Yes, I
email.
saw it. I saw it. I just didn't have
Yeah.
time to get to it.
Yeah.
That's all.
I mean, maybe you can just put it up on the screen, David. I don't know, but I won't take too much more time on that. Anyway, this is the first section of the Tao Te Ching, something like that. And the Tao is spelled T-A-O. Tao means something like way, but I don't think it means way the way derech in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew means way, which is the way you ought to go. It seems to be the way things are, or the way the world is, more than the way you should go, although it may be that distinction itself could be dissolved, depending. So because it's so short, maybe we could actually go through it. And I thought maybe that's the way to.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. I can't put it up on the screen with this small computer. Okay.
So in the translation that was sent out, and therefore people probably have, or most people have, I'm sorry that.
Well, that's okay. I've been reading a
Okay.
translation since I was a teenager, so that's okay.
All right, so we'll just go with this. The way that can be spoken of is not the constant way. Now, one said to be very literal translation is really, I think, quite beautiful. The way, the Tao, that's the way, the Tao. The Tao called Tao is not the Tao. If it's called Tao, it's not the Tao. So there is a gap, unbridgeable in a way, between the reality that we're trying to understand or grasp and anything we say about it. Which is rather reminiscent for some people of the so-called 7th letter of Plato. When I was in school, that was thought to be authentic, and now I think it's not thought to be authentic. But anyhow, in that letter, Plato or whoever wrote it says philosophy, once it's written down, is no longer philosophy. It's dead. It's only in the discussion, in the dialectic, if you like, but only in the talking about it, that you can do philosophy. Once you write it down, it's sterile. So let's be wary of that. So the Tao called the Tao is not the Tao, or the way that can be spoken of is not the constant way. The name that can be named is not the constant name. Now,
I'm sorry.
The nameless was the beginning of heaven and earth. Now, a literal translation that's quite different says, non-being names the 10,000 things beginning. The nameless was the beginning of heaven and earth. And the named was the mother of the 10,000 or the myriad creatures. So when it's nameless, it's the very beginning. And when it's named, you then get the particulars. It puts out, it spawns perhaps the many particulars of the actual world, or the world of our experience.
Let me interrupt you for a second.
Please, anytime.
Yeah, this discussion is also very reminiscent of in the Guide for the Perplexed, where Maimonides spends a lot of time trying to disabuse us that the divinity has any attributes, and attributes are names. Okay, so his perspective is to get to the Tao, or to get to the divinity. Whatever you think about the divinity in the form of a name has to be deconstructed for you, has to be destroyed. So if you think that God is great, God is big, God is merciful, God exists, even existence he takes up, existence as something that also has to be deconstructed. Anyway, it's very similar to that, very similar.
I thank you for that, David. In fact, when you read the guide, you've spent vastly more time on the guide than I have, but it's striking because once you have deconstructed, say, the attributes of God, it's hard to say anything about God, and
You can't say
that's
anything
in
about
fact
God.
his point. And yet he also wants us to read our morning prayers. It's very complicated that way, which are all full of the attributes. So that kind of a level of abstraction, I think we keep that in mind. Anyhow, so you have the nameless. Let me also look at this literal translation.
Water.
So you have, now this is in verse 3. I think it's 3. In our text, it says, hence always rid yourself of desires in order to observe its secrets. That is the secrets of the Tao. Rid yourself of desires. Now, Buddhism, I think, is a little later, but it's a similar idea. Rid yourself of desires in order to observe the secrets of the Tao, of the way, but always allow yourself to have desires. So here we see the other side of that. In order to observe its manifestations, you have to have desires in order to connect with the world in ways in which you can understand its particulars. I don't think those two statements are intended as contradictory of each other, but in fact, they are in this very deep tension. Because if you rid yourself of desires, how can you allow yourself to have desires? Oh, yes. But then it goes on to say, but these two are the same. I'm going to read this other translation to give a flavor of that. The 10,000 things beginning, and I think maybe the 10,000 things are all the myriad particulars of the world. The 10,000 things beginning, being names. Sorry, non-being names the 10,000 things beginning. Being names the 10,000 being. It's being names the 10,000 things mother. Therefore, constantly be desireless, whereby to observe its minutiae, all the particulars. Constantly be desirous, whereby to observe where it ends. And then it says, the two issued from the same origin, or in our text, these two are the same. Ridding yourself of desires and allowing yourself to have desires, these are the same. I don't know that that's the same as Maimonides, but it's useful to keep them in mind. But diverge in name as they issue forth. So being the same, they are called mysteries. In another text, they issue from the same origin and refer to the same thing. And that's supposed to be a literal translation of a text that was recovered from an earlier version. So I'm not even sure they're working from the same literal Chinese text. Being the same, they are called mysteries. They're mysteries because how can you rid yourself of desires and allow yourself to have desires? It's a deep riddle. Being the same, they are called mysteries. Mystery upon mysteries. My literal translation says, deep and remote, doubly deep and remote. The gateway of the manifold desires, the gate of multitudinous minutiae. So we have a gateway to the secrets that makes us aware that we are both supposed to rid ourselves of desire and to allow ourselves to have desires. Um, and and David has suggested, I think, that there is a dualism here. That may be right, or it may be that it's really one thing and not a dualism. But I'll leave that for discussion. I think maybe I should be quiet now and
Okay,
hear.
thanks a lot. That's really a good exposition of it. Nancy?
Yes. Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late. Phil, could you reread verse 3 again in your other translation? Because I'm still struggling with it.
Okay, this
Just
is the
line
verse,
3.
to be fair to everybody, this is the verse that in the translation that was provided by David, and it is, hence always rid yourself of desires and allow yourself to have desires. It says in this other translation, therefore constantly be desireless, whereby to observe its minutiae. The it's being the Tao or the way.
You know, let me try and bring this down to earth a little bit, okay?
Thanks, Phil.
That's fine.
This kind of poetry and the religion that flowed from it was in the beginning, the meditation and illumination of a single individual. Okay, the way these religions come is that somebody has a connection with something and then tries to write it down. Okay, so now what you might want to do is you might want to see if you can get the same connection that he got. Okay, and the connection has something to do with lying in bed at night, and you begin to feel a certain feeling that seems to be passing through you. Okay, the feeling that's passing through you in the beginning is mostly in the back of your head. That's why Jews wear yarmulkes there. That's why the back of the head is sort of a sacred thing. That's why all of the Christian faiths have diadems coming from there. Anyway, the back of the head is sort of a big deal. Okay, so you begin to feel something in the back of your head. It's nameless. This thing is nameless, okay, that you feel. So, and as you're trying to think, and by the way, the thing at the back of the head was called the nous, N-O-U-S, which was the Greek notion of this, okay? So the Greek notion is the feeling that you have at the back of your head when you're lying in bed and you're very, very quiet, and you notice that you're not filled with words. You don't have any words, okay? You're sitting there and you're very, very quiet, and you feel this thing, this sort of feeling at the back of your head, and no words associated with it. And you somehow get the feeling you're not supposed to really try and name this thing, but little by little, what happens is you can't resist trying to shoot a name at it. You can't resist trying to get some sort of angle on this thing, trying to analyze it. The analysis that's going to come, the language that you're going to lay on this thing is going to come through the front of your head. Okay, so you've got the back of your head with no words, and you've got the front of your head, which the Greeks called, by the way, dianoia. And you have the back of your head with no words and the front of your head with words. And as you sit there and play with this thing, you realize that as it issues forth from the back of your head, which also, by the way, is the synthetic area of your head. Okay, this is the area that puts things together, but there's no language in the putting things together. The language comes later on when you've put it together and you name it and it's outside you and you have an objective thing there. And we're always going back and forth between synthesis, between our nous, and between our dianoia. We're always going back and forth between the synthetic aspect of our mind and the particular aspect of our mind. The particular aspect of our mind always comes up with a word or a concept or an image. Images are part of this thing too. Okay, so as you're sitting there, you're playing with this, and you realize that if you're very, very quiet, you might be able to dwell in the back of your head. But when you're dwelling in the back of your head, you have nothing to say about it. You don't know what this is. You don't have anything to say about it. When you get into the front part of your head, into the dianoia, into the objective part of thinking, you end up having something to say about it, but then the experience in the back of your head diminishes or goes away. Now, I'm convinced after studying this poem for years and years, maybe 40 years, not on a daily basis, but on a weekly or a monthly basis, that the poem sort of fits into my notion of what a meditation on the poem is. Okay, the best way to think about these things is to think about them extremely personally. Okay, to try them on and see if they fit some sort of sentiment you're having, some sort of experience you're having. So this poem seems to fit an experience that I've had a lot. Okay, this particular experience. And it makes a lot of sense to me. And it also relates to a lot of Hebrew thought too. Okay, it relates to, for example, prophets. Prophets often get anointed, right? Where do they pour the anointing material? They pour it in our armpit? Do they pour it in our chest? They pour it usually on the back of the head. Okay, so you want to sort of warm up that with warm oil in order to get this feeling started. And we're going to be talking about Moses' experience in 2 weeks. We're not going to be meeting next week, by the way. We're going to be talking about Moses' experience in a couple of weeks with the burning bush. The burning bush is not exterior to himself. It's not like he's walking on a path and sees that outside of himself. The burning bush is a phenomenon that he has inside of himself. And most people who I'm not saying most people, some people think that that's this internal feeling of the noose that he had. Okay, he had the noose there. We're also going to be talking about coming up the 7th book of Plato's Republic, where there are certain indications given as to how we can get our noose connected to our dianoia. Okay, there's a turning motion inside the soul that gets the noose connected to the dianoia. Anyway, so this is my feeling of what this poem is. Now, it'd be very interesting if any of you had some experiences along this line. We're talking about personal experiences that you're willing to share. Okay, so I've shared with you my personal experience about this. Anybody else got some?
But if what we're talking about, that you have to get to a stage in your thought where you don't attach any words, then why would, since there were no words attached to that thought, how could we have an experience that we can share with the group?
Well, that's the whole point. Sure. And Phil made that very, very clear when he said that the word Tao is not the Tao. Okay. So any talking about this is talking about something that is an image of this. Okay. We're not going to get to this per se. You can only get to this personally. You can only get to this internal to yourself. And any talking about it is a bit of a corruption. But let's do it anyway. Let's talk about it anyway, okay? Because that's what we're doing. But you're right. You're right.
But then it's not original. And once you talk about it, it changes.
You're right. You're right. But is this a teachable thing? Is this something you could teach? For example, how would you teach somebody to get their noose excited and to be able to understand
Well,
the
I think
difference?
you describe it, your method of doing that, which makes sense.
Okay, and what's yours?
What? I'm still working on it.
So David, I'd like to make a comment if I may.
Sure, go ahead, Murray.
So I'm struck by how close this poem comes to our sort of our fundamental Jewish experiences. The the poem says that it says the nameless was the beginning of heaven and earth. It sounds to me like the poem that Lao Tzu is saying that the Tao, the divine, who is really nameless, created the heavens and the earth. It says the nameless was the beginning of heaven and earth. That sounds
Right.
very Jewish to me.
Right, right.
He goes on and he says in the third verse that rid yourself of desire in order to observe its secrets. Those are sort of like the essence of the ineffable. And that's mostly, I think, what you were talking about. But the second part of the third verse says something really interesting, but allow yourself to have desires in order to observe its manifestations, which again is very Jewish in my opinion, because it is spoken of that the way you understand God is through God's creations. And that's also very sort of Judaic.
Right,
So see
right.
this poem as reflecting sort of the fundamental Jewish way of thinking, at least as enunciated by Maimonides, the fundamental way of thinking about what God is and how God sort of acts, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. The introspective experience associated with this divine thing also is a very similar sort of thing in the East. For example, people in the East feel that we are, in some sense, the universe. Okay, in some sense, we are the universe. We are the universe that's become self-conscious of itself. Okay, and we have a particular form. We have our body as a form that we're living in at this particular time. So the Easterns feel that we, as the universe, are the divine. Okay, that there's nothing separated from us that is the divine, but in fact, we, ourselves are the divine. And for the creation in Buddhism, the creation in a lot of those other religions has to do with it. The creation is through desire. Through desire, we create. And we as humans create, and the divinity creates. So Murray's right. I mean, and that's why actually I chose this, because this mirrors the Jewish perspective with a big difference. And that is, in the Jewish perspective, the divinity is exterior to us in a logical sense, So the divinity is not particularly part of us. But if we're talking about the Tamuna is a way for the Tamuna was something that the divinity in the Jewish sense put inside of us. Okay, he put inside of us when he created us with this figure inside of us. And if we can get in touch with the figure, not only do we get in touch with God, but we see our connection, our intimate connection to the divine things. Okay, I think many of these religions in their origination are very similar because they have to do with human experience. Okay, somebody, Jimmy, my Uncle Alec, somebody had a human experience, and then with something that they might have called the divine, and then in some sense talked about it, wrote about it, started a new religion. So these are very complementary things.
That is so powerful. Thank you. When you were describing the well, we could have the connection. I mean, I've heard that before, but when you said it, Mr. Glass, I thought if a person in this Jewish religion or faith, whatever, well, I don't know what word you use, but Judaism, I mean, it would be like that would be so powerful to know that and to be raised in something like that. All since you're a child, that it's deeper than just usually when you hear this in different religious beliefs, it's sort of surface. But the way you all are doing this, it's so deep, you know.
Well, we're trying to achieve this connection, okay? This Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed points out that we all have an intellect in situ, an intellect that we have that's put into us that is this figure. But the only way to get the connection is to work the intellect. Okay, is to work it, is to fiddle with it, is to use it, is to, and of course, a lot of Jews spend a lot of time studying the Torah. Studying the Torah hones the intellect, makes the intellect more powerful, makes the intellect and the possibility of getting in touch with this particular thing that we're talking about more powerful. So it isn't, it isn't given. It's something that you have to work on. Maimonides also points out in the Guide for the Perplexed that for some people working on it does nothing, and for some people working on it does something, and he can't explain that. So Nancy, what's your point?
Yeah, I'm listening very attentively to what you're saying, David, and I'm just trying to connect it to what the rabbi was teaching before he went on sabbatical about the Hasidic movement and how they were trying to get away from the intellectualizing of the Temuna and through study we can access the attributes of God. It sounds like what this is saying is completely the other direction. Am I off base here? It sounds like what this is saying is through what you all are saying is through study and consideration and intellectualism, we can begin to attain this connection. But that seems 180 degrees from what the Hasidim were attempting to do through their emotional and their spiritual connection. Am I off base here?
No. But you were talking about a balance. And the balance is a classical balance in this. And the classical balance is always between mathematics and poetry, okay? Or between logic and poetry, between logic and feeling. What?
Two different sides of the brain.
Two different sides of our being. Okay, two different sides of our being. So the people who do a lot of the study are into the logic of the thing mostly. The Hasidim were into the poetic side of the thing. To get there, though, you have to have both.
Okay.
You have to have both, and it depends on the balance. You might have come out of the womb being a poet or being mostly a poet, so you're going to have to spend a lot of time learning your quadratic equations in order to get the mathematical side of yourself.
Yes.
Or you come out and you're really into the mathematical approach to this whole thing, and you're going to have to tune up the poetic side of yourself, but there's no getting there without both.
Thank you.
Oh, and Mr. Glass, when you talked about the Jewish faith in terms of, and the yogic philosophy, which I've been studying since I was, living and doing yoga since I was a teenage, 18. I'm 63 years old. We have, in the 8 limbs of yoga or Ashtanga yoga, we have a law of observance and one niyama, and one of them, there are 5 of them. One is called self-study or swadhyaya. And all my life, I've read on various topics, various authors, and it sounds like this is something that you were saying: self-study, learn, and like what we're doing right now in this class. And I'm the kind of person that's attracted to this kind of class. I'm a yogi.
You're right. And the self-study we were talking about is introspection. Okay.
Introspection.
A real study is introspection. To inspect yourself, the inside of yourself.
Oh
Okay.
my God.
Anyway, that's really what Phil, you got a question too.
Yeah, I wanted to make two little points. Actually, I wanted to say please to Yvette, if I may, that we're on a first name basis here. Okay, but I want to say make a kind of historicist point here. There's Maimonides comes out of several traditions. He certainly studied the Jewish texts, but he also comes from a tradition of Greek and a Muslim philosophy or Arabic Islamic philosophy, very much, and Aristotle. And there's no reason to think that everything he says is going to be found in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, which itself is full of many different things, written, I think, over many centuries. So we can accept the possibility that different views are in conflict with each other. They're not all necessarily the same. And then we can just try to understand each one on its own terms if we can, which with this text, I don't think we can, and where they may differ. I just wanted to make the point that we're always struggling with the text, and when we put things in words, we're always going to be some place removed from the as Murray said, the ineffable.
Right.
Okay, I want to say I'll call you Phil because you've given me that permission. But in Black culture, my elders, my professors, and my grandparents, I will only if you feel say I can call you by your first name. So if Mr. Klass says first name, then I'll do it. But this is
Sure. You can
culture.
call me by my first name too. No
Okay.
problem. It's much
All
easier to pronounce than my last name, so it works.
Okay, thank you, Klass.
I have a question.
So your first name.
Okay, the name that can be named is not the constant name. They use constant 2 times. Constant meaning always.
Sameness, invariance, not in motion.
No.
So the thing that is the Tao is permanent, is stable, is not in motion, never
Right,
changes,
'cause I thought
never
we're not supposed
changes.
to call
Sure.
it anything else.
No. Well, and of course the Hebrew God is called that too. All
Right.
of those things that I just said. So it's the name that can be named. Any name that we use to describe this will attempt to describe one of the attributes of this thing. Okay, one of the attributes. And since we're not after attributes, I mean, but attributes can be very helpful to us as we're approaching the thing. But when we get to the thing and we knock on the door and we open the door and we give a keek, which we take a look, we're not going to see attributes. It's going to be something else.
That's all. We're not supposed to give it attributes.
Right.
Right.
And that is very, very tough.
Very,
Very
difficult.
think about being able to think of is it a thing? What is it? Well, in the end, it may be thinking about thinking itself. Okay, it may be reflection on reflection itself that we're after.
Say God is good, God is great. I mean, we're giving it attributes.
Yeah, that's right. Those are attributes. Those are attributes,
attributes.
and those are our human attributes that we give to this. But it itself has no names. Now, does it have a feeling? Even though it doesn't have any names, I was talking about the sensation in the head. Is that a feeling? Should that be deconstructed too? So you should
But then
feel.
we take everything away.
Well, you take everything away, then you get garnish. You get nothing, right?
Garnish, right.
Okay.
Garnish, help.
So I'd like to make one more comment if I may. So what I would say is this. I mean, the manner in which David has been describing getting into the very back of your head by eliminating all sensations, really, I think, talks about trying to achieve some kind of an epiphany. Now,
Right.
the ability to achieve an epiphany, I think, is very, very difficult, and for many of us, essentially impossible. We can't. We may try, but we can't. So what do we do instead? Maybe we do what people like Heschel talked about. And Heschel says you can begin to understand what God is by observing and trying to understand the product of his creations. And through an understanding of nature, things that are out there that have been produced traditionally by the actions, by the creation of God, that's the way we can come closest to understanding, to begin to understand what God is.
Yeah, and in fact, when we're talking about Moses, when Moses asks God he asked God, I think, twice, in two occasions to show him. One of them is to show me your ways. And to show him his ways, he backs into a rock and he sees creation. So that's that's one of them. The one we're going to talk about is when he asks God for what he is, and God says, Ea Asher Ea. And we're going to spend a lot of time on Ea Asher Ea, which I'm not going to translate into English because it sounds, but that's really where we're going, because it's the Ea Asher Ea, Murray, that if you dwelt on that, really dwelt on that and meditated on that, you might get the epiphany. Okay, that's the thing to dwell on. And that we actually have access to, the Ea Asher Ea. But we sort of pass over that very quickly. Okay, we say, well, this, that, or the other thing. But to really think about what that is, which is in a simple English, is I am what I am what I will be what I will be. It's self-reflective. Okay, it's God is, that's a circular reference. Okay, that's a circular reference where the thing that's referring to itself is the thing that's referring is referring to itself. So I am what I am, Ea Asher Ea, is a strange thing that we also can do. You also can do that. If you can do that, if you can get into a cyclical examination of yourself, where you're examining the examining of yourself, where you're reflecting on the ability to reflect, and you don't get scared of that, because that will create a certain turning sensation inside of you, which may make you a little bit dizzy, but go for it anyway, even though it makes you a little bit dizzy.
Okay, so yesterday I had an unusual
Go right
experience.
ahead and take a shot at it.
Okay, and it seems like that thinking and seeing have a connection. So I'm in my office, I'm waiting for a client, and I see in my office in Oak Brook, there's a lot of cicada noise outside. So I see something on the rug, and I can't tell if it's a piece of dirt or what it is, And then about 5 minutes later, when I look down, there's nothing there. I actually think I hallucinated that. So my next client comes in, and halfway into the session, he says to me, there's a cicada on the floor. I went, what? But it was dying because it kept flipping itself over. And on this rug, it has brown spots. And it's sort of like blended in.
Yeah.
So I was glad to know I wasn't hallucinating, and he took it with him.
Well, but why were you glad to know you weren't hallucinating? Hang on for a second. We shouldn't.
Okay?
Yeah, of course it's okay. I mean, when you're
What I'm seeing and what I'm
Let's-
thinking were two different things.
hallucination is okay if you're over 65.
It's okay.
If you're a young person, it's sure not
Then
okay.
you're
Okay,
nuts,
then
right?
you got no. Then you have to go to a psychiatrist who decides who sort of takes the hallucination out of you. But you should dwell on your hallucinations. They're wonderful things.
I mean, this is just a difficult
Yeah.
concept, I think.
Yeah,
right?
and
It's like
you know,
said,
and
you
what
studied it for years,
right,
so.
and what we're doing is we're approaching this
Yeah.
difficult concept, and we're trying different approaches on the thing. When we do get to Ea Asher Ea, then we'll have more sort of tools. We'll have heard a lot of these concepts to help us explicate that. The other interesting thing is when we get to Plato's seventh book of the Republic, where we can get into this a little bit. In Plato's seventh book of the Republic, Socrates is talking to Glaucon, and he's talking about people being in a cave. They were all in a cave. Okay, we can only see in front of us. We can only see objectively. We're taught to see only objectively. We're taught that what's out there is the only real thing that there is. Okay, so we spend a lot of time looking out there, and people who are able to pick out things out there better than other people get rewarded in the culture. Okay, so objectivity is a real big deal. Anyway, in that particular passage, he is explaining to Glaucon that in fact we're chained. There's chains on us that only let us see in front of us. Okay, so and then Socrates is saying how one day he broke the chains. He broke the chains and got out of the cave. And breaking the chains takes an attitude of thinking, which is called periagogia in Greek. Periagogia means a rotation of looking so that you're looking behind you.
So
Okay,
it's breaking the chains the same way as we're looking at things in a different way.
right,
that you
right,
explained.
right. And what happens is he breaks the chains, he gets outside of them, and he gets to the light of the sun, what they call the light of the sun. So there's an experience of illumination, internal illumination, which a lot of people like, okay, because it makes them feel good, makes them feel they're in touch with something. So anyway, it's a rotation movement. It's looking at yourself, looking at yourself, looking at yourself. So the eye sees itself seeing. The reflecting part of your head sees itself reflecting. The thinking part of you is now curious as to where the thinking is coming from. So the thinking begins to think about itself. We're all the circular reference stuff. And Asher, when God tells Moses what he is, he tells him, I am circular reference. Now, that's not all God is, but that was enough to get Moses into this whole process. And by the way, Moses also does some turning. There are two sections in that particular Torah section where it says Moses looked to the side. Moses turns to the side. He turns to the side twice, okay? And that he's doing the same. Moses must have read Plato's seventh book for sure. Okay, so yeah, he was trying out a method that was probably a secret method that the ancient Jews had to be able to achieve the same thing.
Well, you inspired me earlier when you were talking about self-study. And I thought when I was like 18, 19, into my early 20s, I used to go do internal work. What would you call it? Find out what makes me tick. And I haven't been doing that. I've just been looking outside of myself, reading books over the last decades and decades and decades. But you've inspired me to get back to find out what makes me tick.
That's good. That's right. That's right. What is the source of what is the source of my energy? Where do my words come from? What makes me the subject? What is there behind me that I am the subject of things, that I see things? I mean, all of these sort of basic, simple things. These are simple, but very difficult to fiddle with. I've been fiddling with this stuff for about 40 years. For about 40 years, I've been actually fiddling with this stuff. So little by little, I've become a certain kind of Michiganer because I'm involved in this stuff.
How are you tying this into the Tamuna that we've been?
Okay, the Tamuna, yeah, that's a good question. The Tamuna is the process. The Tamuna isn't a fixed thing. It is the process. It's the same process as Aya, Asher, Aya. It's the process of looking at yourself. It's a process of looking at yourself. All of these passages help us a little bit to look at ourselves, to do the periagogia, to do the turn inside.
The way.
So it's the looking at yourself. When God says to Moses, Aya, Asher, Aya, he is talking about this turn, that God is this turning function, that God put this turning function into us, that if we discover the turning function inside of ourselves, the circular reference function inside of ourselves, then what happens is we can appreciate something about the divine. Now, we don't get the whole of it, okay? I mean, yeah, to get the whole of God, we'd be, I mean, that'd be sort of fun,
We're only
actually.
the myriad creatures.
Yeah, that's, well, I don't know if we're only the myriad creatures. The myriad creatures are different from us, but
Well, that's, I mean.
but we're not,
that's the
okay, we're not
plants,
gonna get the
everything.
whole of it. What we're gonna get is something that, you know, a computer program that inherits the code from another, from a thing. Early on, there's a code. And the guy who's writing the code, creating the code, says that this particular code can get inherited by all of these subsections of the program, okay? So when you get to the subsection of the program, you've got that thing that you've inherited from the maker who put that in there, that he has in his head too. So the divinity in creating us put into us one of the tools that he in fact used in the creation of us, which is the Eir Asher, okay, which is self-reference. Self-reference is a very deep subject, by the way, and I've spent a lot of time working on it. And there's lots of so-called paradoxes that come up. There are logical paradoxes that arise with self-reference. These logical paradoxes, we can get into this another time, but these are very interesting because logical paradoxes also get you out of yourself. Also, you can begin to do self-referencing and feel what that feels like.
Well, before you get off, I want
They-
to go back and
Sure.
ask you one question about, you talked about something called poesis. I want to get some resources so I can read about that.
Yeah, poesis is just poetry. It's a Greek word for poetry. And
Ah,
okay,
hello?
May,
Yes, poetry. Okay.
right,
may I?
sure.
Poesis poesis is making, and they thought of a poem as something made. It's an object that made by a human being, in short terms. But if I might dare to complicate your story about I'll share David. I don't know what Martin Buber thought about that very late in his life, but in I and Thou, which I don't remember when that was written, but it's a middle age or earlier work. He actually takes it as relational. He rejects the purely sort of metaphysical idea of it and says it means I shall be where I shall be, or I will be ultimately with you. He's telling the people who will have to, who Moses has to lead. It's a relational thing. So you can look at it in a metaphysical way and in a self-referential way, or you can look at it as a relational thing. I'm not saying there's any necessary contradiction there.
No.
I
The
do want to
relational
make
thing is
the
very
point
important.
that it's been argued over, and people can consider that. That's all. Thank you.
No, that's good. The relational thing also is a relationship with the aspect of yourself that you want to relate to. So there's a self-relational thing. There's also a relational thing, and Buber spends a lot of time in that and trying to work with this duality between man and God. Okay, and he, in fact, you're right. He, in fact, sees the join between man and God as relational, that God in his mind is not completely separate from man, not completely separate. So the divinity, like the Eastern view, where God is in you in some way. Buber is also into that too. In fact, we're going to talk about Buber at a certain point. I'm looking through Buber. I've read it a few times, and Murray and I are actually working on that right as we speak. We've been reading that for about a year and a half, line by line. Anyway, so I'm looking for something that I can include in the class, a short thing that'll sort of lock it up a little bit or give us a good sense of it. But Martin Buber is a key thinker about this kind of duality relating to itself. All right.
So 2
Any other
2 weeks?
2 weeks, 2 weeks, yeah. And in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing the Parsha with Moses and this burning bush. Does anybody want to take a crack at that?
I think you should do it.
I wouldn't dare.
Why wouldn't you dare, Nancy?
Because it's such that particular parsha has been debated and there's so much commentary.
Yeah, just forget about the commentary. Just go at it on your own.
Right. I'll let
No,
you.
no,
No, I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't. Interpreting.
No, we're not talking about interpreting. We're not talking, well, I don't know, are we interpreting
Yeah.
or are we exploring?
Explicating or interpreting.
Brilliant woman. You're a brilliant woman. We want to hear it.
I would
Phil,
not
do you want to
dare.
take a crack at that?
I would not dare.
Come on. Phil.
Nancy should do it because let me
Nancy,
explain why. Because I've taken on this poem, which is
well,
totally
Charles,
obscure. So I don't want to be out.
I think
out there.
Charles.
Well, Phil, I always respect when you take a crack at something because you always bring in a perspective I've never considered. And I truly appreciate that in your intellectualism. I really do.
Well,
But I'm not touching
Phil is a
I'll do-
scholar.
Okay. I
Phil
would
is
like,
a scholar of the text. Okay, Phil is very, very interested in the textual aspect of this. That's why Phil got into as many translations as he could get of that, and even wanted to look up a friend of his who spoke Chinese fluently. So he he couldn't
That's why
find.
we love Phil.
Okay, that's right. Phil is a textualist, and he's a great dimension to have in this
Yes.
kind of a talk.
Amen. 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 But I'm not taking that partial.
I couldn't convince you. No, I think Charles is going to do it.
Okay.
Anyway, you guys, thanks a lot for
Everybody have
for
a
coming,
couple weeks.
and we'll see everybody in 2 weeks then.
Thank
Okay.
you very much. And thank you
very
all.
much from this quadratic
Okay, bye-bye.
equation, guys. Interesting.